As some of you will surely remember, this channel started out in 2016 as one of the channels that fought against what today we call wokeness, and back then manifested itself mainly through stupid and cringy social justice warriors on social media. It happened mainly in America, but everything that happens there affects the rest of us, so I got into the fight. I came from a liberal perspective, and fought against what I saw as illiberal ideas disguised as liberal ones, and threatening to destroy the left. Since then, the anti-woke alliance largely disappeared from YouTube, for several reasons. First, Google started to suppress our channels. Second, those stupid SJWs that made for such great comedy largely disappeared as well, and gave us no material to work with. Academics like myself, however, realized that they represented a much deeper problem, which stems from anti-liberal ideas infesting today's academia. We kept on fighting it, but in time I realized that wokeness started its inevitable decline, and I'm beating a dying horse. So I started to use my channel to discuss philosophy and culture criticism, the stuff I did before I became a YouTuber. Then again, being a culture critic compelled me to keep following what is going on in the woke sphere, and occasionally analyze it when I see developments. Well, there are new developments, so it's time to break down the processes that are currently in place and causing the disintegration of the woke movement. Okay, some of you might be wondering what the hell I am talking about. If anything, it seems that wokeness is a lot more visible than it was 6 years ago. It is, but as a culture critic I am familiar with this process. When a radical ideology rises, there is a period when its ideas infiltrate the mainstream and become trendy for a while. The members of the movement believe it shows that they are winning, but actually, what is happening is that their ideas are being exploited, commercialized and diluted, and eventually chewed up and spat out. This is what is happening to wokeness right now. Its ideas made their way into the entertainment industry, into the leftist media, and into established left-wing politics, and all of this only precipitates its demise. However, this is not what we are going to talk about. This video is about how the woke movement is now being destroyed from within, by its own ideology. Which cannot happen soon enough, because once wokeness became part of the mainstream, the public began to see it for what it is, and what we are seeing in America today is conservatives exploiting it in order to promote their policies. So far, it is happening only in the red states, but if we don't get liberalism back into shape, there will be nothing to stop them from going further. I am not a fan of many of these conservative policies, so we need to get rid of this woke nonsense as soon as possible. Let's see where we are at. I analyzed in the past what wokeness is, so here I'll provide just a quick summary. Wokeness is a Frankenstein's monster, which brings together several conflicting ideologies, tearing bits and pieces out of them and putting these pieces together to create an ideological abomination. The first of these ideologies is Marxism. Marx philosophized that human history progresses towards a utopian communist society, and does so in a dialectic process. The driving force is the improvement in means of production, which enables humans to create a greater amount of wealth. But there was never enough wealth to feed everyone, so humanity was divided into dominant and oppressed classes. At every point in history, there is an economic system in place, and an ideological paradigm that goes with it that determines the way people think. This paradigm ensures the continuous dominance of the ruling class, until the means of production reach a point where a better economic system can be devised. Then, an oppressed class comes up with the ideology that goes with the system, and overthrows the old order, ushering in the new system. But then the new paradigm becomes dominant, and once again divides people into classes. It's less oppressive, but there's still oppression. However, the next time a revolution happens, said Marx, will be the last revolution, which will result in a communist, classless, utopian society. Why? Because the system that rules now is capitalism. Capitalism was made possible by the Industrial Revolution of the 18th century, and overthrew the feudal system that came before. The revolution was carried out by the bourgeoisie, one of the oppressed classes, and brought about a system in which they dominate, while the proletariat are oppressed. Capitalism is a very powerful system, so powerful that it does two unprecedented things. First, it finally creates enough wealth to ensure the well-being of all humans. Secondly, it destroys all the traditional cultures and will eventually create a global society in which only the capitalist paradigm exists and only two classes. Eventually we will get to a tipping point where all the workers of the world will unite, overthrow the bourgeoisie, and establish a global communist utopia. With this historical theory, Marx injected no less than 4 toxic ideas into our culture. Note, those are not the only toxic ideas he came up with, but those are the ones that come out of his theory of history. First, there's the idea that the future can be scientifically predicted, as the advancement in means of production is something that can be mathematically quantified. This idea produced many revolutionaries who believe that since they know the future, it gives them license to try and bring it about by any means. Second, the idea that society is divided into dominant and oppressed classes. Third, the idea that the oppressed class is the one that holds the truth that will liberate us. And finally, the idea that we are one revolution away from utopia, which means that anyone who stands in the way of that revolution is an evil person, responsible for all the unnecessary suffering we see around us. These 4 ideas had a catastrophic effect on our world in the past century and a half. By the beginning of the 20th century, Marxist thinkers realized that their predictions were not coming to pass and started wondering what went wrong. The answer was to pay more attention to the ruling paradigm. The so-called Neo-marxist thinkers argued that the ruling capitalist paradigm is so pervasive that it completely dominates our consciousness and makes people want things that are bad for them. Yet another toxic idea was introduced, the idea of the false consciousness. The Neo-Marxists claimed that only they can see what is good for humanity, while most people are conditioned by the capitalist system to want things that ensure the persistence of that system, the persistence of their enslavement. This is actually the origin of the concept of woke. To be woke means that you have woken up from the conditioning, like Neo in the Matrix, and see the mechanisms of how you are being enslaved. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so, the mission that the Neo-Marxists set for themselves was to wake up the people from their false consciousness, and do it through a slow march in the institutions, waking up enough people in the positions of power and influence, and finally waking up enough people to create a critical mass that will bring the communist revolution. In the meantime, however, another movement came along, and messed up the works for the Neo-Marxists. The Post-modernists agreed with the Neo-Marxists that our minds are shaped by the paradigm, but they showed that even Marxism itself, and its entire concept of history, are merely shaped by the modern paradigm. According to postmodernists, we cannot find any law that explains the progress of history, and consequently we cannot predict the future. History is much too chaotic, and the shifts between the paradigms happen for random reasons and have no regularity. The Marxist belief in the scientific nature of history collapsed. This should have killed Marxism, but again, it found a way to survive, albeit in a deformed state. This is when we are beginning to see the Frankenstein's monster being assembled. Some thinkers gave up on the first toxic idea that we mentioned, the idea that history is progressing according to scientific laws, but kept the other 4 ideas. These ideas are all predicated on the first idea, and have no leg to stand on without it, but they kept their blind faith in them. And they no longer thought that overthrowing the capitalist system would bring the utopia, but they found another solution. Since Neo-Marxism and Postmodernism both agreed that we are shaped by the paradigm, it led to the belief that everything we are is shaped by the paradigm. Which means that in order to change society and create utopia, all we need to do is make people think differently, by forcing new concepts into their language, and cleaning the language of the old concepts. Thus, political correctness was born. As far as I can tell, the first movement to adopt this way of thinking was radical feminism, and it led to the birth of what I termed Creationist feminism. The Creationist feminists believe that we are all trapped in a structure called the patriarchy, which was created sometime at the beginning of history. This patriarchy created gender roles for men and women, which are not connected to human biology, and are designed to ensure the domination of males over females. The patriarchy prevents us from living in a utopian society, and needs to be overthrown, but we can't see it because we are conditioned to act according to our gender roles. The feminists are women who have woken up and see the problem, and we know that they are right because they belong to the oppressed class, and thus hold the truth that will liberate us. If we listen to the feminists and liberate our minds from the gender roles, utopia will prevail. The creationist feminists do not believe that there is a point in fighting for the rights of individual women, but that all the energy should be turned towards bringing down the patriarchy, an act that will solve all individual problems anyway. In other words, creationist feminism is not pro-women, it is anti-patriarchy. The creationist feminists claim that both women and men suffer in the patriarchy. Men may be the dominant class, but masculinity, the code of behavior that is part of their gender role, is a toxic invention that makes their lives miserable. Only when we give up on the gender roles and have equality between the sexes can we all be happy. But actually, what they are offering isn't equality at all. Let's compare it to Marxism. The Marxists claim, similarly, that both the bourgeoisie and the proletariat suffer in the current system, and communism will free them both. But actually, the people who thrive in capitalism will suffer in a communist world. Their natural traits, innovation, entrepreneurship, competitiveness, strive for greatness, will all be repressed in favor of those who are more collectively minded. The exact same thing goes for the feminist utopia. When you listen to the anti-patriarchy crowd, you realize that what they really want is a world that is built around the traits that are more prevalent in females. Their utopia is built upon female domination. In the 90s, the creationist feminists came up with a new idea how to recruit more people to their cause, and invented intersectionality. The definition of the patriarchy was expanded, and was now called the imperialist white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. What it actually was a power play by the feminists to incorporate the other groups that fought against the hegemonic culture. The creationist feminists argued that capitalism, white supremacy, and imperialism were all actually the results of the patriarchy, and if we bring the patriarchy down, it will solve all the problems of the poor, the non-white and the non-Western. Later they also added heteronormative and cisnormative as adjectives for the patriarchy, to bring in the gay and the trans into their fight as well. This rubbish was taught in the academy, and messed up the minds of many youngsters. In the 2010s, we saw the result online, with the ridiculous SJWs. Feminism seemed ascendant, but the creationist feminists didn't realize that they were sowing the seeds of their own destruction, because once you plant the seed of creationist thinking in the minds of other groups, they might start to form their own versions of it, and then the inner contradictions you created with your Frankenstein's monster are going to explode. First, there's the creationist non-whites, led mainly by African American scholars and activists, who created what is known as critical race theory, but should simply be called anti-whiteness. They believe that it is rather whiteness, not the patriarchy, that was the structure that was imposed on us and created the oppressive society. For the anti-patriarchy faction, white supremacy is an adjective of the patriarchy. For the anti-whiteness faction, sexism is an adjective of whiteness. Whiteness is a structure that is built upon the things that white people are better at, thus giving them the advantage and ensuring their domination. Looking back at the history of intersectionality, we can see that it was actually created by black feminists as a way to sneak anti-whiteness into feminist thought, sowing the seeds of an eventual takeover. In the second half of the 2010s, the takeover was complete, as black feminists promoted the concept of white feminism, that is, feminism that is infected by whiteness. And the white feminists were helpless against this takeover, since woke ideology determines that the more oppressed are those that hold the truth. They had to capitulate, humbly accept that they are evil due to their whiteness, and be relegated to the sidelines of the feminist movement. But that is not even half of it. The entire feminist movement then came under the attack of the anti-cis-normativity faction, or as I call them, the neo-not-cis. The neo-Nazis believe that it is cis-normativity that is the structure responsible for all other oppressions. They believe that everyone is born with a gender identity, and to be happy, they must live out that identity. But cis-normativity created the idea that biological sex is a binary, and that gender is determined by this sex binary. The gender roles, the thing that the feminists complain about, are just a byproduct of this belief in the sex binary, and will be resolved once we get rid of it. To be woke, for them, is to realize that our sex does not define us, and to live by our gender. This is diametrically opposed to creationist feminism, since the whole idea there is that the sex binary is real, while the gender is a construct. Some feminists capitulated and adopted the anti-cis normativity view. Others fight back, but are in a losing position, since the transgenders are allegedly more oppressed. The only way for the TERFs to achieve victory is to somehow show that they are the more oppressed, so they try to claim that trans women are actually men. But it is hard to convince the world that women are more oppressed than transgenders. So, according to the logic that they themselves introduced, it means that the truth is not on their side. In the current, updated woke mindset, the creationist feminist ideology as a whole is evil, and should be silenced. The anti-whiteness and anti-cis normativity factions are currently the ones setting the tone in the woke movement, which means that they are heading for a collision. The first signs are already there.
I want to move to other examples just before we run out of time, because some of these are really great, including Janice Raymond and Sandy Stone on, and this is applicable to the current day in discussions of TERFs. Tell us a little bit about those two feminists and what honestly it says about modern day feminist discourse around trans women.
Yeah, it was really important to me to show how the logic of anti-trans feminists, who argue that trans women are not women, is actually part of white feminism, even though it's less obvious, because we most often think of white feminism in terms of its racism. But there is a subliminal racism in the position of TERFs. And we often talk about and recognize that anti-trans feminists are what we call biological essentialists, right? They say sex is real. You're born a sex. It's very tidy and clear, and it can never change, right? Biology is destiny, is that kind of logic, which flies in the face of research that shows that anything up to 2% of births are intersex to some degree, right? But it's an insistence that biology is extremely tidy and sex is always straightforward and set in stone.
Right. And then the point you make about biological essentialism, that is a step away from a white supremacist perspective, right? Where we are these static things and our environment or our skin color or the gender that we have been assigned at birth, that is natural. And anything unnatural is evil in and of itself. And that is very much in keeping with these themes that you've been discussing today.
I think that's absolutely right. And, my specialty as a scholar is in 19th century race science and the beginnings of a belief in biological essentialism about sex. And it actually turns out that when people got really, really attached to the sex binary, it was as a result of race science.
Alright, students, let's see how well you have been paying attention to my lessons. Who can explain what just happened here? Alright, I'll explain it. See if this is what you got out of it as well. First of all, this is all happening on the Majority Report, Sam Seder's channel. Sam is an old-fashioned American progressive, one who doesn't believe that we need a revolution to overthrow the system and bring utopia, but wants to advance progressive values within the democratic system. Alas for him, he is still stuck in the 2000s, not realizing how the cultural terrain has changed. He never tried to understand what wokeness is about, or the arguments of the anti-woke. There are many like him on the American left, and this allows the woke to run rings around them, and get them to unwittingly promote their woke values. Here we have a guest who is a woke white feminist, who has capitulated and gave up on her anti-patriarchy ideology. But she had a choice whether to capitulate to anti-whiteness or anti-cis normativity, and she chose the first option. What she does here is portraying the actions of the TERFs as driven not by transphobia, but by whiteness. In other words, she is saying that whiteness is the root of the problem, and cis-normative is just an adjective of it. This is an attempt to save feminism, and also a power play by the anti-whiteness faction to try to dominate the anti-cis normativity faction, and the latter is not going to accept it. I have not seen them explaining yet how white supremacy is actually the result of cisnormativity, but I am sure that it is coming, and we will see even more disintegration. All of this does not escape the eye of the general public, and it is beginning to get what's going on. We are seeing more and more black voices speaking up against the anti-whiteness ideology, and I believe that in time, this will lead to more blacks voting for the Republican Party, and no longer being in the pocket of the Democrats. If this happens, it will be to the benefit of black people, and of America. From an outsider's perspective, it is painfully obvious that black Americans are being held back by the victim mentality promoted by the woke. Adopting a conservative way of thinking will surely break that mentality. Some of you might wonder why I think it a good thing that more blacks will become conservatives, when I am a liberal. Guys, this is what liberalism should be about. It is about getting the conservatives to accept your liberal ideas. The conservatives fight to protect against the dangers contained in these new ideas, and through this battle, the ideas get refined, until eventually you reach an agreed solution, and the ideas become embedded in the values of your country. This process makes the conservative parties more open, and inclusive of groups they were previously hostile to. The price is that the liberal parties lose voters, but it's a price you should be willing to pay. If you are an American progressive who doesn't want that, but prefers to see blacks keep voting Democrat, it means that you don't really care about them. CRT is currently being used by progressive politicians to get black voters to keep hating America. Hopefully, it will backfire and break the automatic hold Democrats have over the black vote. One place where we can see the success of true liberal politics is with the gay community. When the gays were oppressed, the anti-heteronormativity line of thinking was prevalent among them. The basic idea here is that heteronormativity, that is, the idea that heterosexuality is the only normal type of sexuality, straight is the only normal type of behavior, and relationships should end in marriage, is the thing that oppresses us all. If we smash heteronormativity and permit ourselves to love everyone, a loving utopia will unfold. Meanwhile, liberals fought to get the public to realize that gay is just a different type of normal, and succeeded. This gave gays and lesbians the ability to have a regular bourgeois life, even get married, and most of them chose to do so, to the chagrin of the anti-heteronormativity ideologues. On top of that, this meant that gays are among the least oppressed groups, so the anti-heteronormativity faction cannot claim to represent the truth. We hardly hear from them anymore. To make things worse, many gays now feel threatened by wokeness. The gay community always contained many who behaved in ways typical of the opposite gender, that is, masculine lesbians and feminine gays. The neo-Nazis are now attacking these identities and claiming that they represent cisnormativity, and pressure these gays and lesbians to undergo gender transition. The reaction came in the form of the LGB Alliance, which broke away from the historical alliance with the transgendered, adding to the disintegration of wokeness. Recently, the gay British columnist Owen Jones reacted to this development by publishing an article titled "Why You Can't Separate the T from LGB," trying to save the old LGBT alliance. The logical way of doing so would have been to point out that these groups still have problems, and should unite to support each other in battling these problems. But Owen is woke, so he cannot think in such ways. First of all, he must deny the fact that the woke ideology is the very thing that causes the fractioning he is trying to prevent. So he writes, "The argument against LGBT and T unity goes like this. Sexual orientation and gender identity are two different things, and therefore should not be conflated." No. The argument is that the trans activists, driven by their anti-cis-normativity ideology, are trying to destroy the gay identity. But Jones is incapable of dealing with this argument, since this would be admitting that the woke ideology is the problem. Instead, he must find a way to blame it on the system, and restore the alliance around a mutual fight against this oppressive system. He writes, "But the reason above all else we are bound together is because there is a common basis for our oppression. LGBTQ+ people are persecuted because we are all deemed to be traitors to our assigned gender identity. The root of hatred against gay men, for example, is that we have made the ultimate betrayal of masculine identity, which is to be attracted to and have sex with men. That is seen as the most unmanly act you can do. Homophobia, you see, is the violent border guard of masculinity. It is an offshoot of patriarchy and misogyny. Did you catch that? Jones is a gay activist who has capitulated, and knows that he cannot make it about heteronormativity as the root of the problem. So he pretends to make it about cisnormativity, and claims that homophobia stems from the need to defend the imposed gender identity. This is indeed the language of the anti-cisnormativity ideology, which claims that the identity of man is foisted upon us, and doesn't fit all those it is assigned to. But the traits he uses to define what man is, masculinity and having sex with women, are not about gender identity. They are the gender role. Jones is actually adopting the anti-patriarchy logic here, the logic of the TERFs that he claims to be against, and disguises it as anti-cisnormativity logic. I'm not sure how aware he is of this deception, but I don't think the anti-cisnormativity crowd is going to be fooled. The historic alliance between LGB and T, at least in woke circles, is doomed. In summation, we see that all these different identities that intersectional feminism try to unite under the anti-patriarchy flag, turning the straight white male into the boogeyman that allegedly oppresses them all, have now turned on each other, and are tearing each other apart. But, hang on, there were two more adjectives to intersectional patriarchy, which were not about identity. It is also imperialist and capitalist. And, naturally, this resulted in two more woke factions, the anti-imperialism faction and the anti-capitalism faction. Let's discuss where they are at. As mentioned, wokeness has now been adopted and exploited by left-wing political parties. But this pertains mainly to identity-based wokeism. In America, the woke logic and slogans are being used by Democratic politicians to tar their Republican rivals as racist, misogynist, transphobic, and the like. The anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist types of wokeness, however, are not popular among the Democratic establishment. In the 2016 elections, these factions supported Senator Bernie Sanders in his bid to become a Democratic nominee, and the party establishment smeared them by the same tactics they use against right-wingers. Suddenly, these woke progressives found themselves being called misogynists for not supporting Hillary Clinton. It made them develop an aversion towards identity politics, and towards the woke factions promoting them. Then, in 2018, the Justice Democrats became a thing, getting some actually woke Congress members elected. This caused a split between the two factions. The anti-capitalism faction is currently focusing on changing the system from within, supporting the Justice Democrats. The anti-imperialism faction has completely given up on the Democratic Party, and is trying to form an alternative. The anti-imperialism faction basically believes that Western imperialism in general, and American imperialism in particular, are the root of all problems in the world. On YouTube, its main channel is the Jimmy Dore Show. Jimmy's line is probably the most conceited humblebrag I've ever heard, as he humbly says that he is just a pothead comedian sitting in his garage and making videos, but then he adds that he figures things out better than all the political analysts on established media, which is basically a way of saying, I am the biggest genius that ever was. So no, Jimmy is indeed just a pothead comedian sitting in his garage, and his level of understanding of politics is just what you would expect. He has a very superficial worldview, and he often brings on more clever and manipulative members of the anti-imperialism faction, including total hacks, and just eats up whatever they feed him. Then again, being a comedian, he does have a healthier understanding of things on the gut level, and senses the ridiculousness of wokeness better than other left-wing media figures. He mocks identity politics, cancel culture, big tech censorship, mainstream media lies, the democratic establishment, self-righteous elites, Trump derangement syndrome, and other woke nonsense. And in that, he is quite representative of the attitude of the anti-imperialism faction as a whole. This brings Jimmy closer to the dissident right, that agree with him on many points. A lot of them even mistakenly think that he is an anti-woke leftist, and respect him for it. Well, no, Jimmy is not anti-woke. He is woke as fuck, but he represents a faction of wokeness, the anti-imperialism faction, that has broken off and is at war with all the other factions. Then again, when it comes to imperialism, I do think that his gut is right about one thing. The American foreign policy needs to change. Instead of promoting democracy abroad, America should focus on strengthening democracy at home. The foundations of democracy are currently being undermined by many agents and factors, not just the woke, and no amount of American diplomacy or military might will help it. Work on fixing Western democracy, make it great again, and the internet will then see to it that it spreads elsewhere. Anti-capitalism, of course, has existed for a long time. The idea that capitalism is the thing that prevents us from achieving utopia is what Marxism is all about. But while Marxism also had a framework for an alternative, woke anti-capitalism, represented online by buffoonish narcissists like Hasanabi and Vosh, has no such framework. It is basically a trend, which just badmouths capitalism without offering a serious alternative. Then again, its rise is a symptom of the current weakness of the capitalist system. Anti-capitalism is on the rise, and will probably become stronger in the coming years, unless the economy makes a miraculous turnaround. At the moment, it contributes to the disintegration of wokeness, as many of its members have an aversion to identity politics, and to the other woke elements adopted by the leftist political establishment. And it also broke away from the anti-imperialism faction, which is too radical for them. In the future, it will probably lead to the rise of more serious socialist politics. This, then, is the absolute state of wokeness. Some leftists might object, and claim that today's online left is not what it was in the last decade. After the SJWs got blown out of the water by the anti-SJW alliance, the retaliation came in the form of BreadTube, progressive YouTubers who promoted their ideas in a more thoughtful and effective way. The BreadTubers are usually not 100% woke, but show more nuance in their thinking. The problem is, they are blind to how deep the rot of wokeness is.
As we know, the vast majority of the Black Lives Matter protests were peaceful and millions of people participated and it was great and good, and you know I'm in favor of this, okay? There were also looters, arsonists, and rioters. Those are real things that actually did happen and did exist. And while riots are a thing, while looting and arson is a thing that tend to accompany mass protests, that doesn't mean they're good in and of themselves. Oftentimes, a lot of innocent people get hurt. You know, people's personal property gets destroyed. People get injured, sometimes even killed. It's not good, right? Now, what conservatives did and will continue to do, and still do right now, is hyperfixate on the riots and the looting and the arson as a way of distracting from the broader Black Lives Rally movement, right? They do that all the time.
You just don't get it, do you, Vosh? The rioters, looters, and arsonists are not some random psychos that have taken advantage of the chaos. They are the most hardcore woke ideologues. They are doing it because they want to bring down the system. The problem with BreadTubers is that they arose in retaliation to right-wing YouTube, so they focus on the stupidity found on the right, and don't really try to understand the ideology that they are defending. They don't realize that the woke ideology is rotten to the core, and whatever intelligent arguments they are going to make, it's not going to make it smell any better. I think they are finally starting to get it, though. The BreadTubers, especially the gamers among them, are beginning to show growing signs of frustration with the sea of woke stupidity they chose to swim in, and are lashing out at it, sounding more and more like a bunch of Gamergate shitlords.
Dude, self-appointed white ally? That's covert white supremacy? I hate this shit. I hate this country, dude. Oh my god. I hate this. I hate lefties. Why can't lefties keep it simple? Why can't you keep it simple? Why can't you keep it simple?
My issue as a trans person is the fact that you, a guy that isn't super well versed on trans shit, brought on a known transphobe knowing he might bring up transphobic shit. You aren't exactly a Vosh at trans debates. I hope that the rest of your life is as horrible as it is every single day, okay? There you go. Suck my dick. I despise you. I despise you more than anything else on the planet. You are fucking cancer, okay? You are cancer in this community, and you're cancer in every community.
Keep hating your life then, working class Andy.
What can I say to a person like this? I don't even know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I just want to play video games.
As for the older progressive YouTube channels, They are also being destroyed by wokeness. We mentioned how Majority Report never bothered to find out what wokeness is about, and are completely out of touch and ineffective because of it. The other channels that are not woke, that is, those that don't want a revolution but just to advance progressive policies, are not doing much better. Secular Talk does acknowledge the dangers of wokeness, but, the simple-minded tool that he is, he never understood how deep the problem goes, and thought it was marginal. As a result, progressive politics have left him behind, and he is a lot less popular than he used to be. Meanwhile, the Young Turks reacted by cynically hitching their wagon to the anti-whiteness faction, and using their platform to smear white people and portray them as racists. They think that in this way they can remain relevant, and steer the wagon towards their progressive agenda. But the ploy is obvious, as are their laughably bad propaganda and fake news, and it only helps to expose the anti-whiteness movement for what it is. What we are seeing is that almost no one on the left is woke to the danger of wokeness, which is why I think the American left is about to crash and burn like the British left and the Israeli left. The presidency of Trump gave the American left a boost, but now that lifeline is gone. Is there a light at the end of this woke tunnel? Well, look at the atheist community on YouTube. Atheist YouTube rose in the 2000s, when Christianity looked like a big joke, as the media was filled with creationists, televangelists, religious neocons, and rabid homophobes. The atheist YouTubers fought them with comedy and satire, combined with intellectual and scientific arguments, producing entertaining and effective videos. It was highly important because it gave a sense of belonging to many people in the world, including places in the US, where atheists were harassed or even oppressed and persecuted. But then, several things happened. First, atheism became more acceptable in America, and did not feel so rebellious. Secondly, as the stupid Christian figures got mocked into oblivion, they were replaced by more intelligent Christians, who came on YouTube and started to fight back. And finally, the atheist movement was infected by woke ideology, manifested in what was called Atheism Plus. Atheism Plus was simply an attempt to make atheism the center of intersectionality. In other words, to make Christianity the structure that is oppressing us, and everything else, white supremacy, sexism, homophobia, capitalism, its adjectives. And for some feminists, it was an attempt to add Christianity as an adjective of the patriarchy. In any case, it caused a split in the atheist movement, as many skeptically minded atheists saw wokeness for what it was, just another religion. By the middle of the 2010s, the atheist movement in America, and on YouTube, was essentially dead. But then, it started to recuperate. The SJW debate died down, the comedians and entertainers moved on to other issues, and the field was left for a different type of atheist YouTubers. The leading ones now are ex-theists, who want to have a serious and thoughtful argument against the religion that they left behind.
If Kokol wants to educate his audience on how to have real, productive conversations with atheists, he should listen to what atheists have to say about the claims he and other apologists make about us. Frankly, there is no excuse for still spreading misconceptions like this. It indicates an extremely severe lack of interest in an informed perspective on the people you're talking about, or a refusal to integrate new information into your views on this topic. Unfortunately, conservative religious families, which are Christian apologetics' main audience, will likely cling to what Kokol is saying here, and any non-believer within that family will suffer as their loved ones inform their perspective on them with falsehoods and stereotypes instead of what the non-believer themselves has to say. Your misconceptions are hurting us, Kokol, and we've been saying this for years, but it's painfully obvious how little you care.
This is Genetically Modified Skeptic, one of the biggest atheist channels right now. The interesting thing here is that he does not argue against systemic problems, real or imaginary. He is concerned about the individual kids who lost their faith and are stuck in a hostile environment. Unlike the woke, who are inventing imaginary systemic problems so they can keep on fighting the fights that have already been won, the atheist activists, at least those that argue against Christianity, have acknowledged the change and reacted accordingly. And they also adopted more suitable tactics, arguing rationally and without the mocking tone of the past. There is not a lot of social media glory in fighting this type of fight. It takes people who really care about the plight of individuals, because they have been there themselves. Because of these developments, atheists and Christians now have an actual civil and productive debate on YouTube. And the most important outcome is that it provides a space for ex-Muslims, who either converted to Christianity or became atheists, to play a significant role. When ex-Muslims first risked their lives to come out as atheists, thinking that the online atheist community finally provides them with a safe haven, they were amazed to find that they are being attacked by woke atheists. For the woke, Muslims are victims of whiteness and/or imperialism, and are thus a protected group. They try to silence any criticism of Islam, thus helping Islamists carry on their merry way. Now, the ex-Muslims can express themselves, and atheists and Christians work together to criticize Islam. While they developed mutual respect for each other, they only lost respect for Islam the more they learned about it. All the techniques of YouTube criticism, debate, comedy, and satire are now turned against Islam in an unprecedented manner. It wasn't long ago that jihadists put fear in our hearts about daring to mock Islam. But as a few brave YouTubers dared to do it, the fear slowly dissipated, and now Islam is getting its ass handed to it online, and its bad sides are exposed and mocked in all their naked ugliness. To me, it's the most entertaining thing happening online at the moment.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Muhammad's Boom Boom Room, where all of my guests either agree with me completely or they go boom. I am your host, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon me. And with me now is the Grand Wizard of a white supremacist hate group called the Ku Klux Klan. Mrs. Wizard, how nice of you to join me.
Mrs., I'm a man, you camel-riding carpet kisser. Didn't you read my bio?
Peace be upon me. Unfortunately, I couldn't read your bio because, as everyone knows, I can't read. I assumed you were a woman due to your lovely white burqa.
Hello, dear Kafir. It seems that you are very depressed and you are looking for a meaning in life. Well, what do you know? Alhamdulillah, I am here today to explain to you why you should find meaning again in Islam. My name is Sheikh Yabudi, and this is 10 reasons why you should become a Muslim. Alhamdulillah.
Well, here you have it, the world's first and only castle made entirely of the Quran. Now, why would we want to do this? Why would we want to make a castle out of the Quran? Well, it looks like our friends who want to stab people in faces need a safe space where they can run to whenever someone tells them the truth about their prophet. So I have made the perfect safe space where they can run in and be surrounded by the Quran and never hear anything about how stupid it is.
The effects of this shellacking have already been discussed in detail in this video, which I made last year. It only intensified since. The point I'm trying to make is that online atheism only got better and stronger after being infected by wokeness. The same can happen to liberalism. Wokeness is a pandemic we have to go through, but we will eventually emerge stronger for it. For the moment, however, be sure to remain vaccinated.